Shannon Claire Carlin is passionate about life and growth. She cares deeply about humankind and the natural world. Shannon is dedicated to working with people through addiction, trauma, relationship, and the body. She received her master's degree in integral counseling psychology from the California Institute of Integral Studies in 2014, including a practicum working with youth on moderation management for drug and alcohol use. At MPBC, MAPS Public Benefit Corporation, an offshoot of MAPS itself, Shannon serves as MDMA Therapy Training Program Manager, overseeing administration and program development to educate professionals and researchers to provide MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD in approved settings. Shannon is also committed to psychedelic harm reduction and continues to provide integration services through the Zendo project. Shannon has served as co-therapist on the MAPS-sponsored Phase 2 trial researching MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for anxiety associated with life-threatening illness, and will be a co-therapist at the Phase 3 site in Los Angeles researching MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for severe PTSD. She is a dancer and California native, an adventurer at heart. Shannon can be found running in nature or swimming in a body of water. Shannon, thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you.
I invite you, if you would like to join me in just taking your gaze inward and taking a couple of deep breaths. And acknowledging the ways that we make our visions become reality. All the work of many lifetimes that's led us to today. All the work in the history of MAPS, psychedelic research and healing. Taking a deep breath of appreciation for all that you've been through to get you to this point here today. And acknowledging ourselves and each other for the ways that we're active in carrying out what we believe in on the inside. So today I'm happy to share when the vision of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy becomes a reality, which is happening now, and a little bit about our therapy training. I'm Shannon Claire Carlin. I'm a marriage family therapist intern in California. I served as co-therapist on the Marin study with Dr. Phil Wolfson, MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for anxiety associated with life-threatening illness. And I will also serve as a therapist with PTSD populations on our upcoming trial, which I'll tell you about. Very brief history, because I assume most people in this room know this chemical, MDMA, which therapeutically produces feelings of empathy, care, and compassion for oneself and others. We're doing some fMRI studies, and we believe that it reduces activity in the amygdala, the fear response center of the brain, so that we can process information without the same kind of fear attachment to it. You may have heard of MDMA used recreationally and sold or distributed as ecstasy and Molly. MDMA is the pure active component of those street drugs. Today we'll be speaking about MDMA in the context of a therapeutic approach. Our therapeutic approach is outlined in our treatment manual, which is on the MAPS Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies website, maps.org. Our treatment involves 2 people in a therapy team. One person is a licensed psychotherapist or mental health provider, psychologist, psychiatrist, and the other person is somebody in the mental health field working under the supervision of the licensed person, if not licensed themselves. The therapeutic approach is non-directive therapy. It's client-based, and we talk about the inner healing intelligence, which is intrinsically in each of us, that we, given the right conditions, will move towards wholeness in our lives. So this therapy is really about creating those right conditions that are supportive and safe. MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, the first government-approved clinical trial was in '92. The process of getting a medicine approved by the FDA into a legal prescription goes through many stages of clinical trials. Phase 1 is a safety study. It was the first safety study with MDMA therapy administered in humans with Charlie Grob in '96. And for the 2 decades following that, we moved into phase 2 studies, which is a phase of clinical trials where you take the medical treatment, MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, and you apply it for a particular condition. So many of our studies have focused on post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and you'll also hear about some other applications. In 2010, we published our phase 2 results in a veteran population. 2013, we did long-term follow-ups, 12 to 18 months after somebody had completed the study to see if the effects lasted in duration. We've also done international studies and will continue to. This is the basic course of treatment for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy in a MAPS-sponsored study. A person who has PTSD or has the condition that we're studying and would like to learn more about the treatment contacts our site. And when they pass an initial phone screening, they come in for in-depth screening. In this, we look at medical history, and we have to make sure that we aren't enrolling somebody who has a contraindication, such as hypertension. When somebody passes the screening, they become enrolled as a study participant, and their course of treatment begins with their 2 co-therapists. It starts with 3 preparatory sessions. These are 90-minute talk therapy sessions where no medicine is administered. These sessions help form the therapeutic alliance and relationship and allow the therapist to get to know what the person's experience is like with their trauma or their anxiety. They also prepare the person for what to expect in the experimental session. So the first experimental session takes place, and the subject participant either gets MDMA or placebo. The session lasts for 8 hours with the 2 therapists. And following each experimental session, there are 3 integration talk therapy sessions. These are 90 minutes as well, and the first one is the very next morning. So the participant stays the night at the study site after their experimental session. They get fed and supervised and get to have their private space to rest. And then in the morning, they meet again with their therapists. And this whole round of treatment, 1 experimental session and 3 integrations, happens 3 times in total. And then somebody has finished their course of treatment in the study, and they go into follow-up, where we follow up at different time points to see how they're doing. We've completed most of our phase 2 trials. There's 1 current trial, cognitive behavioral conjoint therapy, and I believe Ann Wagner is here, one of our therapists in that study in Charleston, which is a very great study that we get to treat 2 people, a person who has PTSD and one of their loved ones, a friend or family member or spouse who has been impacted by their loved one having PTSD. Phase 2 trials are double-blind, placebo-controlled, and we have tested MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD, for social anxiety in adults with autism. That's at UCLA with Charlie Grobe and Alicia Danforth. I mentioned the study with Phil and Julaine, anxiety associated with life-threatening illness, and then the study with couples. Post-traumatic stress, we've completed 6 phase 2 trials specifically testing with PTSD. They follow the basic course of treatment I just outlined. And we've had variations of the protocol to test for dose response. So the active dose we've tested in different studies ranges from 75 milligrams to 125 milligrams. We've tested active versus inactive placebo, but turns out it's really difficult to pretend like you got a full dose of MDMA if you didn't really. What we found in the low doses with 30 milligrams was because MDMA has a stimulant chain that it was stimulating but didn't have the feelings of empathy, which actually provoked anxiety in people and was increasing their negative PTSD symptoms. So for the sake of their safety, we discontinued the active placebo and moved into inactive, which is a sugar pill. We've also tested for source of trauma. One of our trials was survivors of childhood sexual abuse. Another trial was veterans, firefighters, police officers. We've found the results to be fairly equivalent, which might mean that regardless of the source of the trauma, that MDMA-assisted psychotherapy could be an effective treatment. Our primary outcome measure for PTSD studies is CAPS, the Clinician-Administered PTSD Scale. It's a 30-question interview, and it asks questions about different symptom clusters, such as dissociation or hyperarousal, hypervigilance. And it produces a score that's indicative of the severity of PTSD. on the caps that we used for the phase 2 trials, the line that goes across the middle, the black line, is at a score of 50, which is where somebody qualifies as having PTSD. So anything above that, somebody technically has a diagnosis of PTSD, and below that, they no longer do. The red lines are our active group that received full dose MDMA. The blue is the placebo group. Stage 1 baseline at the far left is before anybody has received any therapy. Primary in this chart is after 2 experimental sessions. So in our protocol for phase 2, we would do 2 blind sessions, meaning we didn't disclose, we didn't know if the person got MDMA or sugar pill, though like I said, it's pretty easy to guess, though sometimes we're wrong. And so after 2 sessions, we unblind, and we find out, did this participant get placebo or did they get full dose MDMA? And at that point, the people who had placebo discontinue their participation in that segment of the study. And the people who had MDMA go on to have their 3rd MDMA session, open label, meaning we know that they're going to get MDMA. The people who had placebo get to cross over to where you see stage 2 in the dotted line. They get to return and they get an opportunity to have those 3 MDMA-assisted psychotherapy sessions. And again, that's open label, so we know that they're going to get MDMA. These sets of asterisks above the bars show you the clinical significance, and it's pretty amazing significance with a probability less than 0.001. The first set of asterisks, the primary column, show each group in comparison to baseline. The second set of asterisks at end of stage 2 is the placebo group, comparing where their CAP score was when they returned to start the MDMA therapy sessions and where it was after the 3 MDMA therapy sessions. And the final set of asterisks is both groups when we followed up with them a year or more later. So you can see people are getting big drops, these drops in the red line and the dotted line, big drops in CAP score, and on average, at the end of the study, everybody's below the line where they no longer technically qualify for the post-traumatic stress diagnosis. Pretty amazing results. These are some expected reactions during experimental sessions. These are things we speak about with a participant when we do the informed consent before they enroll, and also in our preparation about what to expect when they take MDMA. There are common things you may be familiar with: teeth grinding, jaw clenching, sometimes difficulty balancing. So we do our best to educate and also to provide safety around these reactions. The other study that I mentioned with Dr. Phil Wolfson is anxiety associated with life-threatening illness. I got the opportunity to work with 3 study participants with Phil. And the study treated in total 18 people in the Bay Area. This picture is Mount Tam in Marin, which from our therapy room we got 180-degree views of. I'm not sure if that's a confounding factor in the data, but our primary outcome measure was the state trait anxiety inventory with the trait subscale. And so this is an inventory to measure anxiety. We had a score between 20 to 80, tells us the level of anxiety that somebody has. And these are the results, not yet published, fresh out of the statistical outputs. And so our preliminary review of the results, you can see the active group in red and the placebo group again in blue, and the significant decrease in their stay anxiety scores, even through 6-month follow-up, which we have done with all of the participants who have completed the study, but we're still in the midst of follow-up with the rest of them. I think Phil did their last session only a few months ago. Some of the secondary outcome measures of the study, one of them was Beck Depression Inventory. And so we know that anxiety related to life-threatening illness can also go along with depression. We've also found some results in regards to trauma, which was an interesting cross with our PTSD group. And again, seeing that people's BDI score is really decreasing. After the phase 2 research, we got FDA to review our analysis of the post-traumatic stress data and approve phase 3 trials that are upcoming. Phase 3 is a segment of clinical research where you test a particular treatment in a particular condition in a much larger population to see if your results hold in a larger group. and also to see in a larger group if there are some contraindications or some people that it doesn't work very well for. It's more likely to come up when your sample size is bigger. So we needed more therapists to offer this training to many more participants. We are in the midst of completing an in-depth process of training 85 practitioners who will work on phase 3. On behalf of the training committee, we feel very proud of these 85 people who have been through a pretty in-depth training process, committing their time and all the skill that they bring before that from their profession. They went through a 5-module program, an online course created by my colleague Ali Fiducia, a live training where we spent a week together with Annie and Michael Mithofer and Marcella Otilla-Rowe, watching their therapy videos and pausing to have discussion, and they can tell us why they did certain things at different times so that we can learn the non-directive approach. Each trainee did a workshop elective. Many people did a weekend of holotropic breathwork or somatic experiencing or Hakomi. These are all modalities that relate to our treatment method and are mentioned in the treatment manual. Then we all returned together for another week, more hands-on learning. We did holotropic breathwork as a group, role plays so that people can practice having a co-therapist, which is pretty unique in the psychotherapy world. And the final piece of training is supervision. Our live trainings took place this is Estes Park, Colorado. We had a training in Charleston, Hermosa Beach, California, and we had several trainings just an hour north of here at Stony Point. The MT1 trial is the therapist study. It's an FDA-approved trial where we can enroll researchers who are training to offer MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, and they actually get a chance to receive MDMA therapy themselves. Each person enrolled gets 1 placebo and 1 MDMA session, and these take place in Boulder and Charleston. And we're pretty proud that the FDA, and amazed that the FDA approved us. It's been a very important part of many of our therapists' training, especially if people come in psychedelically naive as a therapist, or not ever having that therapeutic context, regardless of whether they hadn't had a psychedelic or not. Supervision is the final piece of the training I mentioned, and we're imminently starting a supervision study. In the US, it's called MP16. In Canada, it's MP17. We have 14 sites. It's an open label trial. It's a phase 2 trial. We are enrolling people with severe PTSD. And one of the purposes of this study is to give these 85 new MDMA therapists are out at these 14 sites, and we've trained them in depth, but then what? It's that feeling when you're a therapist and you're supposed to be ready to do therapy, but you've never actually sat in a room with a client before. And so we give them the opportunity to have a lot of support and feedback during their first participant treatment, beyond what we typically provide. So we do in-depth video review with trained and experienced adherence raters. We have supervisors, Annie, Michael, and Marcella, I mentioned before, senior MDMA therapists who provide feedback to their supervisees, the new therapy pairs. These are the 14 sites where we're starting the supervision study, which will roll out into phase 3. You have 2 sites in New York, one at NYU, and one a private practice on the Upper West Side. Whoop, whoop. So we are very excited that in the last couple of months we've received 2 good pieces of news from the FDA. One is breakthrough designation, and this is granted to research organizations that have an urgent treatment, meaning that the population has an urgent need for this treatment, and we know that the rates of suicide and co-occurring disorders in post-traumatic stress populations are very high, and that the current treatments available to people with trauma are not very effective. So the breakthrough designation with the FDA allows our entire process of applying and preparing for phase 3 to be expedited. And if you've ever worked with the FDA, having it expedited is a huge gift. It's a huge relief of resources. They also granted us the Special Protocol Assignment, SPA. And this means that we are kind of in a handshake agreement with the FDA that they like our protocol design for phase 3, and if the results are significant, and if there are no surprising safety data that we hadn't seen in our phase 2 trials, that it's very likely that MDMA-assisted psychotherapy would be approved as a legal prescription medicine. So we're all celebrating at MPBC, MAPS Public Benefit Corporation, but we're also like, oh, and we still have to do phase 3, which is a really big study, 14 sites, 200 to 300 study participants. We'll do a phase 3 trial in Europe about a year later. It's really exciting. Phase 3 will be broken up into 2 different segments, which will help us with the management of the project and determining statistically how many participants within that range we need to treat. And this is Marcella receiving investigational drug at her site in Boulder. After we've begun phase 3, MAPS will apply for an FDA program called Expanded Access. And this would allow us to train more therapists and have more sites become DEA approved because we need to meet the demand. So our phase 2 trials were around 20 to 24 study participants each. And we have wait lists as long as 700 people. Our phase 3 trial will treat as many as 300 people in 14 sites. You can only imagine what the wait lists for that will be like. So it's very clear that the demand is there and that it's urgent. And expanded access is likely to be approved after we apply next year. We're hoping to gain approval for it in early 2019, which is when we would launch the next offering of the therapy training program to applicants who meet the prerequisites I mentioned. They come in as a co-therapy pair. One person is a licensed psychotherapist, psychiatrist, or psychologist, and the other person has experience working with trauma and clinically and works under the supervision of the licensed person. So that launches our next round of therapy training program. This is another one of our therapy trainings in Fort Collins, Colorado. 2019 is when we'll be accepting applications, and what we're really looking for in that round of the training is people who would be expanded access sites. They have a team of therapists who know how to work with non-ordinary states of consciousness. Our therapy also includes optional body work, which is in the form of holotropic breath work body work. And we're looking for people not only who have the therapists in place, but have a good idea of a facility. Finding a facility to conduct this research is no small feat. It's hard enough to find an office, let alone to find a place that you could do an 8-hour therapy session. We use optional music. We sometimes need to turn it up. We sometimes need to get pretty loud in our sessions or allow our study participant to be as loud as they need to for their process. It's a place where the study participant stays the night with an additional room for a night attendant to stay and supervise them overnight. So it's a difficult task to find that, not to mention that DEA needs to come and they need to approve the site too. So those are some things that people can be thinking about now, is who in my city, if you're a provider and you're thinking about offering this in the future, who else in my city would be a good provider? What kind of training do I need? Would this be a good time to finish my license, or for myself, my intern hours? Would this be a good time to get some extracurricular training and body work, such as Hakomi or somatic experiencing? You can read more about our training program on the MAPS website under Participate, and you can add your email to receive updates when we know more about the timelines for expanded access, the prerequisites, and suggested trainings you could do in the meantime. We hope that MDMA-assisted psychotherapy will be approved by the FDA after our phase 3 trials, and we're hopeful that this will happen in 2021. That would launch us into a future network of psychedelic clinics. And I have a special guest who's going to speak for just a moment or two. I want to invite up Rachel Hope, who was a study participant with Michael and Annie Mithofer in Charleston. And she's just going to bring it down to earth a little bit.
I like to think of myself as Exhibit A, like lines and asterisks. I'm a human being, and that I'm incredibly grateful that I got to be one of these rare few people who were in the clinical trial, because I wouldn't be here alive if it wasn't for that. So in 2012, I started saying, yeah, I'll talk to the press, I'll do interviews, like a pay it forward, give back. And what I wanted to say is like it must have been an incredible transformation for me to be public about surviving childhood rape. I mean, this is a hardcore reality to talk about publicly, but that's why I did it, because I'm not alone. I'm sure so many people in this room at least know someone who has survived that, and where's the hope for people like us? So standing in, after doing a presentation or talking, the line of people who would come up to me and say, where do I get into the trial? Where can I get this treatment? My daughter just tried to kill herself. My wife is extremely ill. And that's driven me crazy. I mean, I've just, where to send these people. So this is like the best news I've heard in about 5 years. And all of those who are supportive of the network or participating in the network or opening, I'm incredibly grateful, because I have to have some place to send people. And it's been heartbreaking to even have people in my life who couldn't get into the trial. So this expanded access, oh my gosh, it is incredible. But I wanted to urge everyone to spread the word, call your representatives, your different therapists in the community, ask insurance companies, just start kind of putting the pressure and asking for this treatment and for this therapy. I think we can all just do more, because it's so important. I just want to tell you, I was incredibly grateful to have met and gotten to know Dr. Richard Rockefeller before he passed away. And I was advocating because I wanted to give back. I was advocating because I wanted people to get healthy the way I got healthy. But then I met him, and he helped me realize that this treatment could be the most important solution to our world's major problem, which is, are we going to even be able to make it on this planet, or allow it to be sustainable for us? And he said that MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, in his opinion, was the most important cause that I could do. I'm an environmental activist. And he said that it was even more urgent than advocating for the environment, because it was our choices as a humanity that was at effect. And what we really need is to remember our interconnectedness, our empathy, heal our wound of separateness. And that could heal us as individuals, but also free us to be champions for the causes that we care about. And if we get a tipping point, I think this could be the tipping point, we could turn a lot of things around. So I really appreciate everything everyone's doing in this room, but let's put pressure on everybody out there that we want this, we want this, we want this. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you to Rachel, all of our study participants who share their lives to make this treatment available to people in the future, for our supporters, Richard Rockefeller's legacy, and all of our supporters, Rick Doblin, Amy Emerson, my guides in the training program, Phil Wolfson, my husband, Ali Fiducia, and all of the people who are not able to receive treatment right now, who are just holding on to hope. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire.
It's a question that is very hot for us right now in terms of racial equality and gender equality and various identities. One of our phase 3 sites is the University of Connecticut. Give me a shout out. Yeah, yep. We have some of our therapists who are going to work on that study, and it's led by Dr. Monica Williams, who specializes in race-based trauma. And she's kind of schooling us a little bit on it, and how we can make all of our therapists across all of our sites more inclusive, and also how we can employ more people of color as therapists and in our training program. So that site is really a leader in informing us and recruiting participants of diverse populations. It's only a start, but we're considering it now as we roll out. It's difficult in clinical research. There's a lot of baggage around race and clinical research and psychedelics and race. So we're keep working on it and having it be a dialogue. And as far as access with economics, we're working with an insurance company pretty quietly to see how this treatment could be covered by insurance in the future. It's a very long process, and even though we're several years from even knowing if we get this approved, now is the time to start doing that. We have to create new billing codes. It's crazy, but we don't want this to just be approved and then it costs, what, $5,000 to get a treatment, and who gets that? We have already been feeling that. We have been doing trials in Israel. We've done a few international trials, Switzerland. So we have some familiarity with the European Medical Association Agency, EMA. There is an international agreement, it's not binding, that there's some reciprocity between countries that have clinical trial data. And we're doing our best to meet those most stringent standards in all of our US studies so that that data can count towards EMA application. But we will also need to do trials in Europe to meet their regulation. Canada, for example, is much different than the FDA. Health Canada has its own, again, more stringent hoops to jump through. And so we've now done 2 trials there, and we'll do phase 3. And so we're getting familiar, but it is a laborious process. We talk about it in our informed consent before they enroll, and we talk about it in the 90-minute talk therapy prep sessions, of which there's 3 before their first experimental session. We talk about all of the potential reactions. Our informed consent is like an 80-page document. We pretty much have to tell them of any possible thing that's known to possibly happen to somebody when they take MDMA. And there isn't research to tell us exactly what is that's happening, that in the raver culture might be called Monday or Tuesday blues or serotonin syndrome, serotonin depletion. So we're learning more about the receptors and what's happening chemically through our brain scans. But we do let people know that there can be a dip in mood, a flat affect, or even a depressed affect. And for some people, it doesn't happen at all. For some people, it happens one day after. Some people, it happens for a full week. And so we let them know to expect that. In our phase 2 trials, we would keep them overnight after their session. We would have an in-person session the next morning. We would make sure they had a secured ride, that somebody in their life was coming to pick them up and take them home, that they weren't going to jump right back into work that day, that they were going to have some self-care techniques, which we'd talked about in advance. And in our phase 2 trials, our protocol called for one of the therapists would call up the participant every day for 7 days. So, for example, Phil and I would take turns and call up and just kind of check in, like, how's today going? How are you doing? What do you need? And sometimes that call would be 5 minutes. I'm great. I'm going to the park with my friend. I don't need anything. And sometimes it would be a lot longer than that. Yeah, it's why we started out attempting the active placebo. We were, really trying to preserve as much as we can the double blind, and it was causing anxiety. So we got rid of the anxiety piece for people and did the sugar pill. We are trained to do the same treatment modality whether we think the person has placebo or whether we think that they have MDMA. And people get a lot of benefit out of the placebo sessions, but sometimes, you might think, wow, an 8-hour therapy session with no MDMA to help you get through that. We notice things like people tend to get hungry earlier if they haven't gotten MDMA. But like I said, we're wrong sometimes. Sometimes we swear that person is sober as stone, and we find out they had full dose MDMA. And it happens the other way around. And when it happens, we are a little shocked, but we kind of just shake it off and be like, okay, we can't fully know subjectively if somebody's received it or not. And we do our best to provide the exact same treatment. Yeah. We have been offering a segment of our training through CIS, the California Institute of Integral Studies, in their Psychedelic Therapies and Research Certificate program. And in that, we've trained 80 people at a time, which is by far the largest training we've had. That program draws a quite diverse crowd. And we've been able to find some experts in the field of LGBTQ, et cetera, psychology, especially in the Bay Area. And so we've actually pulled them in to be advisors and collaborators in updating the languaging of our screening forms to be gender and sexual orientation inclusive, our informed consent, our therapeutic approach, and we're really working on updating what is currently framed as the male-female co-therapist pair to find a way to be inclusive and to also address the essence of why we did that, which is to provide safety and balance, which definitely can be provided and be inclusive of all people. And as far as study participants, those people are, and having more diverse people in terms of gender and sexual orientation as therapists will help us recruit and provide safe therapy for those populations. There are some trials being formed in the Bay Area that specifically have a mind for that. Yeah, thank you.